Radio 786. Hear the difference.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very warm welcome to another edition of On the Couch on Radio 786 and 100.4 FM. Now my name is Zainab Bean, and of course it's Thursday. It means it is our weekly Advice Assembly, and Advice Assembly is usually a weekly meeting of tenants, occupiers and activists hosted by Reclaim the City and Difuna Ukwazi. It is also a space to learn about eviction laws and also our rights and responsibilities as tenants, and to stand in solidarity to prevent and resist unlawful evictions. It also is about unfair landlord practices. Social solidarity and sharing knowledge is now more important and essential, especially in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and massive economic hardships facing the country. Now, during this weekly On-Air Advice Assembly, we will cover topics like what the current position is on evictions now that the state of disaster has come to an end. We'll also look at tenants who cannot pay rent and what to do as both the landlord and the tenant, what is an unlawful eviction and what to do if you are being unlawfully evicted. Various ways your landlord can harass you and what can be done about them cutting services such as your electricity, your water, or your water supply. And then of course the responsibilities of bodies like the police, the court and the rental housing tribunal, where you can seek help if these institutions can't or won't help you. And then early cancellations of a lease by the landlord or the tenant. Rent is getting more expensive while people have lost income and faces rising cost of living. Now, for the last couple of weeks, we've been sketching the scenario of Megan, who was evicted from her home that she's been with for about 10 years. But we will be discussing that a bit later. Just a reminder to the listener that my guest for this evening is Disha Governor from Difuna Ukwazi, as well as Lamumba Chia from Reclaim the City. You're more than welcome to give us a call or to WhatsApp your comments or questions to 0786 10 11 12 if you have any. That's 0786 10 11 12. This evening's focus is on the court that has granted an eviction. What options are available? 0786 10 11 12. Let's welcome the guest. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Thanks so much for your time.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Absolute pleasure, absolute pleasure. So as I said, we do have in studio from Difuna Ukwazi, Disha Governor, as well as Lamumba Chia. Now, for the last couple of weeks, we've been speaking about Megan, who was evicted from a place she called home for more than 10 years. She missed rent payments due to a job loss during the national lockdown, and now she has nowhere to go. What options does she have? And we've kind of looked at what exactly those options are, etc. But what options are there really available if the court decides to grant the landlord's application for your eviction? The judgment will obviously include a date by which you have to leave the property and all of those things. But let's first find out from the panel this evening what exactly happens to Megan in this particular case, Disha.
So what happens to Megan obviously depends on what order was granted by the court,
okay,
and the manner in which the order was granted. So, for instance, if the eviction order was granted when Megan didn't have an opportunity to go to court and put forward her side of the story, and so basically if the order was granted in her absence, basically it's considered a default judgment.
Okay.
Then Megan may have the option of, for instance, bringing an application to rescind that judgment.
Okay.
So there's a specific time frame within which she would need to bring that application once she has knowledge of the eviction order being granted. And she would obviously have to explain to the court why she wasn't at court at the time when the matter was being heard. And then obviously if the application is granted, she then gets an opportunity to put her side of the story before the court then makes a fresh decision as to whether or not she should be evicted.
Lamumba, you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you. Looking at it, and we're looking at it from Reclaim the City point of view, from a street perspective, and we talk about just and equitable, and we see it that justice has failed Megan in the sense that she has been staying there and she got a kid and she lost her job, and because of the state of disaster couldn't have anything. We felt that from the street, the government should do something about that, because even being evicted, in the papers or in the affidavit, the city has to be cited so that they should give her alternative accommodation in that regard.
And then if I could just jump in here and say, and pick up on what Lamumba has said, which is that Another aspect in terms of depending on how the court process was followed is that if, for instance, these key material facts around Megan's situation was never put before the court, if the city was never cited, especially in instances of where a person would be rendered homeless, and if that would be Megan's position, then there's also an option to potentially appeal the judgment if those things weren't considered by the court.
You're listening to Radio 786 100.4 FM. That there, the voice of Disha Governor from Difuna Kwazi, and I also have joining her Lamumba Chia from Reclaim the City. The focus this evening is on the courts that has granted an eviction and what options are available. 0786 10 11 12. Now, of course, I want to just chat about the fact that the court gives its decision by way of a judgment, right? And that the judgment is the final part of a court case. And a valid judgment resolves all the issues between the parties and also terminates the court case. Now, in this case, what can Megan basically do in terms of this judgment?
So I think like I said, it does depend on what
the process,
what process has followed, and so if, for instance, a judgment is granted and there was certain evidence that wasn't properly before the court, or certain law which wasn't potentially considered by the court that they needed to consider before granting the judgment, then she may actually have an option of, like I say, appealing the matter. And where she can then go to the High Court and ask that court to specifically reconsider the judgment of the Magistrates Court, if that was where her case was heard.
Lamumba?
Yeah, thanks. Adding to what Disha said, because people would just think that after the judgment has been given, that's done and dusted. If you're not happy, there are procedures to follow. And to make it clear to listeners is that if you are appealing, it can't go to the magistrate court. It goes now to the High Court, which you have to use an attorney to defend you, given the facts that maybe you were not properly, you're not happy because you felt that this has not been, all the terms and conditions that you felt that would be taken into consideration wasn't. So you got that right as a tenant to go to the High Court. Okay.
So in Megan's case, who would you recommend she go to for assistance in terms of her case?
So the first thing she would need to do is obviously seek legal advice to find out whether she has any grounds to either appeal the decision. So legal representation would be her first port of call, especially if it's post a judgment. I mean, Lumumba has been through the process of an appeal process. Granted, it was on the other side where we had actually won the case. We had the eviction application dismissed, and then it was the landlord that had appealed the matter. But even in those instances, it is necessary to seek legal advice to see whether or not there is about what can be done.
Okay. And then in terms of a judgment or an order and this decision in which is a general principle that has three attributes. Speak to us about this. The fact that the legal definition of a judgment or order is a decision which as a general principle has three attributes. Speak to us about that.
So, usually a judgment is something that is considered final in effect. So it resolves the matter between the parties. Secondly, it has to be clear on what the decision is, what is the finding that has been made, and it has to give very clear direction onto what the parties are responsible for. So that's something what we call relief. So the judgment has to state, what the relief is and whether that relief and who has been given that relief. And then thirdly, it must have been the judgment and the order that is made has to also speak to what was actually asked for before the court. So those essentially are considered the main components of a judgment.
In terms of, we've been speaking about alternative accommodation quite a few times on this platform. So what happens in Megan's case when it comes to the alternative accommodation that is supposed to be offered to her in this case?
Just as Disha said about the application paper in the affidavit, if the city wasn't cited So it becomes a problem. But normally, the city needs to be cited in that paper. And given the fact that if she got like a legal representative, then those are some of the principles to be followed, so that in terms of being evicted, the city has to give an alternative accommodation to her.
But would you advise that it would be better if she seeks her own accommodation?
So it's always better to see if you are able to find accommodation for yourself. I mean, I think Lumumba knows well enough that you can you have to try very hard to find something that is suitable for you for yourself. And working with as a Reclaim the City member, he also has been exposed to, for instance, what offers of alternative accommodation the city does make, like for instance Volverivier and Blikkiesdorp. And I mean, Lumumba, you can maybe speak to the quality of that alternative accommodation that the city offers.
Yeah. Talking about the alternative accommodation that the city offers is really beyond, in a far way beyond human accommodation. Because looking like when we went to Volkswagen, the conditions were really bad, because it's just like people have been taken and dumped somewhere that there's no life. So it's very difficult. Talking about looking for your own alternative accommodation is good, but at this point that Megan or you, the evictee, you doesn't have an income. So how will you be able to get a proper accommodation? I think also it comes also with the solidarity with comrades who at times during the session they could assist in one way or the other. That might be, but that will not be a long-term solution.
Okay.
But an immediate solution, comrades can congregate to assist, but if things change in terms of work, at least, and then she or he that has been evicted might have income now to look for a suitable place that will fit their specific need.
Yeah. In terms of whether the court considers certain things like the impact of having to move to an alternative accommodation, do they take things into consideration, like the fact that Megan has a child and the fact that Megan will be impacted in terms of maybe traveling and all of those things? Are those things considered when giving this alternative accommodation?
They're supposed to be. And obviously the court itself will consider the various factors that impact the person who's about to be evicted, including their dependents and if there are specific vulnerable groups. At the end of the day, though, when it comes to the offer of alternative accommodation from the city, one has to ask, well, is the city properly considering these factors when they make the offers of alternative accommodation to people who are evicted into homelessness? And I think that's where some of the issues arise for people being evicted, because you hear stories of persons saying, they want to send me so far away from all my support systems, and so how will I manage? And so that begs the question, what the nature of this alternative accommodation that's being offered, and is the impact on the person that's going to be evicted and relocated, are those things being considered by the city?
Because many things are impacted when you are being relocated to another, especially if you've been living in a certain area and you need to go to something like Blikkiesdorp, an area like that. I mean, the traveling and being close to things like medical facilities and things like that, all of that are impacted, of course. 0216 991 or 0786 10 12. We have one WhatsApp message that says, thank you for reminding us of what steps we need to take at this stage of eviction. When we think back, it reminds us about the fear but also courage we had, even more reminding us that it's not who you are, but that the system as people call it, but has been won for the right reasons. Comrade Lumumba and Comrade Disha, thank you for encouraging us out here. Much appreciated, from Ashura. And then there's also one person wanting to know, what does it mean when the court has a reserving judgment?
So a reserved judgment is basically after hearing the matter, after hearing both sides, the court decides that it needs to take some time to consider what it has heard before it will make its decision.
So asking for more time, basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Citing my instance when my court case was in the magistrate court and even in the high court, there was a time that all the lawyers, the respondent and applicant, they have done their argument for and against, and then the judges will say they are reserving judgment. So it takes, I think it gives the judges or magistrate to some time to actually look for issues to see what will impact and stuff like that. So it's been reserved. So the magistrate or the judge got that authority to postpone it to a later day.
And when you come back, then they will they will call you back to court for when they are ready to hand down their judgment.
But so like if you are given this reserving judgment or whatever the case be, is it something that you must be worried about, or is it something that should mean that you're also being granted more time?
It's definitely not something that you should worry about, because it's something that occurs often, and it just obviously, like Lamumba mentioned, it gives the magistrate or the judge more time to consider what was argued before him or her, in order to make a decision which is just and equitable. So it's definitely not something to be worried about in that respect. And of course, as long as the judgment is reserved, it means that the status quo remains. So you would remain in your house until such time as there's a judgment either granting the eviction, alternatively dismissing the eviction, in which case you would then continue to stay in your home.
Radio 786 100.4 FM. We're talking about the courts that have granted an eviction, what options are available. Disha Governor from Difuna Ukwazi, as well as Lamumba Chia from Reclaim the City, speaks to us this evening. And if you have any questions or comments, 0786 10 11 12. What happens in a case when you do not vacate the property by the time the court order ordered you to vacate? What happens in this case?
Well, I would say the order has been given, and the orders have to be respected. And because there are precise date that you have to vacate, and the sheriff will definitely come to inform you to take your things out. But if you don't, then the sheriff got the right to come and throw your things out, because that's the order has been made. But in case you because people are human beings, if the date reach and you can't make it, I think there's always room to engage to say that, well, you were supposed to leave, you couldn't. But it depends now on the landlord or the sheriff, depending on the situation that you are faced. Like, for example, when my case in the High Court was done, I spoke with the landlord, then couldn't leave at a particular time, though we won. But he now was very understanding to say that, no, take your time, because I had something, take your time to go. So it depends on the personal situation.
But I think a meaningful conversation with the landlord is always encouraged, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So the reality is that if an order's been granted, then there's the legal right for the sheriff to evict you. So the only way that you would be able to continue to stay for just a few more days, if you needed that, or would be to actually then speak to the landlord, who then has the right to either say yes or no, because as it is, the order stands, so there is that entitlement to have you evicted.
And then the role of SAPS in the execution of the eviction.
So SAPS is sometimes present during eviction processes, and that's specifically where there's been a request that SAP be present. Maybe there's an opinion or a view that there could be some violence that could occur during the eviction, especially, and I think you've seen it in instances where there's this fear that there will be retribution from communities, or a person won't go quietly, in inverted commas, and that there may be some violence. Then there could be a request for SAPS to assist. But SAPS's role is to ensure that it is that the order is carried out
according to the law,
lawfully. So SAPS isn't there to evict the person. That's the sheriff's job. And if it's just in the event of any, problems. Say, for instance, if there's violence, undue violence that's now being used against a tenant, SAPS would have to step in and stop that.
Here's a question with regards to what happens if your goods are being damaged during the process of an eviction. What can happen in this case? And SAPS was not particularly present.
Well, I would say if your goods are damaged in this process, then and it's been damaged by who? If it's been damaged by
the landlord,
by the landlord, I think it's a criminal issue. If you are not, if it's a criminal issue that the tenant can open against the landlord for doing such, for damaging the property of or the goods of the tenant.
One of the other concerns I think comes to mind is that when you've been offered alternative accommodation and you haven't been shown the place or whatever, or how often do you actually see where you're going before you are evicted and need to leave? Or do you just see it the day that you leave?
So there's been a range of concerns with regards to that, because it's not always the case that a person is given an opportunity to view the alternative accommodation that's being offered by the city, and that's incredibly problematic, because you would need to view the offered site in order to respond meaningfully to it, and to accept it with full knowledge, to know whether or not it is a site that is going to sort of further compound your vulnerability. So I would encourage everyone, if there is alternative accommodation that is offered by the city, for instance, that it is necessary to ask for a site visit, so that you can go out and see where it is, and see what's around it as well, and whether or not you'd be able to, for instance, access transport, healthcare, that sort of thing, before you accept the offer.
And then one of the other concerns is, how often do people actually get an eviction letter or need to vacate when they when alternative accommodation has not been offered? So what happens to the person where there's no alternative accommodation and the sheriff comes and you need to leave? What happens? Lumumba?
This is really problematic, because that means, for me, I feel that the right processes were not followed, and because I feel the magistrate also has to know that, because with the city got an obligation to fight homelessness. So evicting somebody to homelessness also goes back to the city, because the city is trying to fight homelessness. So it goes back to the city that they have to do something about alternative accommodation. But taking people far away from the city just goes back to refer to the olden days of apartheid. How people always walk in the city and then have to be sent far away from the city. Meanwhile, with our work with Reclaim the City, there are sites. There are sites within the city, the periphery of the city, that the city could build temporary houses to accommodate people. Why taking people far away? Why are you taking people far away from where maybe their children have been going to school and taking them far away? So there's no like that human consideration of the kids, which we're gonna sit and say the city has to take care of everybody. It's the mother city, but it's been unmotherly to its own citizens.
Nitisha?
Yeah, it is a sad reality that, say, for instance, if there was no alternative accommodation offered and they are going to be evicted and they have nowhere else to go, I think that's the reality that we see so many people facing. It's a hard and harsh one, and that's why we continue the fight that we do, that we are involved in to try to have more well-located affordable housing built, have a city that is caring in its processes and ensures that it is involved in eviction matters, especially where people are going to be rendered homeless, and in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and I also just want to remind us is that you must ensure that you it's very important to ensure that you kind of find your own accommodation. That's kind of very important. But it also says that if you have not been allocated temporary emergency accommodation from the city, you need to go to the civic centre, and you can go to the civic centre with a court order and explain that you are going to be made homeless and are in need of temporary emergency accommodation. But I also want to remind listeners that if you have any questions, you can go to the Facebook page and Twitter of Ndifuna Ukwazi. You can also visit www.evictions.org.za, and of course the clinic, the housing clinic, Ndifuna Ukwazi Housing Clinic, on 062 352 9372 for any further details, or you may email ntombi@nu.org.za. On a final note, what else is important for people at this point in terms of Megan's case particularly?
Oh, in terms of Megan's case in particular, it's important to know that she does have rights, and to explore those rights to the fullest extent, in order to ensure that she isn't rendered harmless.
Lamumba?
Yeah, in terms of Meghan case, is really a bitter pill for me to swallow. It's very painful in the sense that Meghan got a little kid.
Yeah.
And we go through the process and then the law that has to really safeguard her. And then we hear about just and equitable. For me, I don't see how it is just and equitable to evict Meghan with a little baby. So the Ubuntu on the humanity, for me, that aspect is really dying in our community, because for me, as a person on the street, as a Reclaim the City member, that's not just and equitable, given the fact that Meghan has been rendered homeless with a kid, which the court always consider OH, people with wheelchair or women-headed homes with kids and stuff like that. But that wasn't really taken for me into consideration. So it's very painful
in terms of Meghan's case. And that's how we have to come to the end of this edition of On the Couch. It has been lovely speaking to both Disha Govender from Difuna Ukwazi and also Lamumba Chia from Reclaim the City, focusing on Meghan's case and, of course, so what happens when the court has granted an eviction and also the possible options that are available. A reminder that you can, if you are seeking any legal representation to appeal your eviction, you can go to either Difuna Ukwazi's housing clinic and call them on 062-352-9372. Legal Aid SA, the offices in CBD, Athlone and Bellville, and then Legal Practice Council appoints a private attorney. They are situated on the 29th and 30th floor in Absa Centre, Riebeek Street in Cape Town. Then the UWC and UCT and Stellenbosch University Law Clinics. And then, of course, visit probono.org for more information. But also, as I mentioned, evictions.org.za to find free legal clinics in South Africa. And then just a reminder that the 10-week AA program is, of course, still on the go. It is happening every Wednesday between 5 and 7 at the Bertha House at 6769 Main Road in Mowbray. And if you need to learn any of the laws that governs evictions, and this is absolutely free, contact Yusra on 065 993 1324, or you may email her on yusra@nu.org.za. That's all we have time for now. Thanks so much to my guests, both to Disha and to Lamumba. Thanks so much for your time and all of the very best.
Shukran, Salam.
Thank you very much.
And from myself, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.